Welcome to part 2 of my interview with Dr. Cameron Jones about Spanish and Mexican California's African descent pioneers. So in the first half, as you recall, we talked about the people who came to Alta California from New Spain, people of different ethnicities, and in particular, people of African descent, and how this really played a role in their integration to society on the frontier. So in this half, the second half of the interview, we're going to talk a little bit about how things played out under U.S. rule after the Spanish and Mexican period, and how those families and their legacy continued into today's California. So again, I had a great time talking to Cameron, and I think you will really like the second half of this interview. So here we go. What about under U.S. occupation and later U.S. statehood? You mentioned that especially the elite among them were oftentimes classified as Spanish, Espanol under Spain and Mexico, but then under the U.S., they were listed as white, say, in the census. But informally, was there prejudice, difficulty, racism that they had to deal with despite their official census classification?
Yeah.
Or do you know? Do we know?
Yeah. So there's some informal. Yeah. I mean, you're right to ask that. There is some informal evidence to suggest that they weren't accepted locally. There's a case down in San Bernardino where a couple was going to get married, and the husband was viewed by, this is right after California statehood, so viewed by the U.S. official down there as being black, and the community just couldn't understand. They're like, "What? What do you mean?" They're like, "Well, interracial marriage is illegal in the United States at this time," and they're like, "Well, we're the same class. Like, I don't understand." The man was wealthy. Um, this also might, and this is, what I'm thinking about and working on, play into the decline of the power of the Californios, right? So when the California becomes a state, they're still very powerful. The Constitution, the California Constitution, it's written in 1849, and it's ratified in 1850. It's written both in English and Spanish. 8 of the 40 people at the convention are Californios. The convention is bilingual, right? Just kind of gives you an idea of the power of the Californios still at the birth of statehood. Within a few decades, they're all out of power. They lose their land. This is, famously, the U.S. government made them show up in San Francisco and defend their land grants.
Right.
As a kid, I was taught actually that they lost most of those cases. That's actually not true. They overwhelmingly won the cases, but in doing so, it bankrupts them. And the taxes that were being levied bankrupt them. And there was a lot more push for agriculture as opposed to ranching, which was what, planting crops as opposed to raising cattle, livestock. It's what they were focused on.
And so many of them had to mortgage or sell or give their property to the very lawyers that were defending them in order to keep their court cases going.
Right. And so, yeah, they have to essentially buy, and then there's a big drought in the 1860s, which kills off all the cattle. So there's factors going on there. But one would wonder if, race had a way of playing into that. And that's something that I haven't found the smoking gun yet. But I do know that a lot of the grants that were given by Pio Pico were denied in that process, disproportionately more. Now, there's some issues with the timing of that because he was giving them out at the last minute before the transfer of power.
Right.
So that's what there's a Supreme Court case actually where they hear it and they're like, "You just backdated this. He gave us out after the treaty was ratified." And they lose the case and it doesn't go anywhere. But is that a factor? These are some of the questions I still haven't quite answered. I'm still, the project's ongoing. Kind of waiting, trying to get funding to keep this going. Yeah.
Have you noticed any? And you mentioned you're focusing on Los Angeles, the Pueblo of Los Angeles, but have you been able to look into differences or continuities between, say, the experience of African descendant Californios, let's say, in Southern California and in the northern area of the territory?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. They certainly were more concentrated in the South,
Yeah, it
although
seems like that.
there were some that were significant. Good example, Juana Briones, who is a
Juana
famous,
Briones, right?
yeah, she's of African descent. Um, in fact, I'm pretty sure the picture that everyone says is her is actually not her,
Yeah, I don't think so either.
because it matches. Oh, you've seen it. Okay, so we're on the same page, because there's a
Yeah.
painting of her and it looks nothing like the painting. Um, and so,
And you want to, I'm going to just to
yeah,
interrupt, sorry. In the Los Gatos Museum several years ago, did a exhibit about Juana Briones, and there were a couple of photos of nieces of hers, and it from the end of the 19th century, and they didn't look anything like that picture that you often see, and that sort of made me think, well, at least here's a close relative, so that can give us an idea of what she may have looked like.
yeah. And again, I'm not really using pictures, because race is a perception, and I'm, there's a reason I use the term African descended, because I'm just interested in, where their ancestry and how that
Yeah,
might affect them going forward. It's a tricky game, right? Because I can't necessarily, race is what the community and themselves decide it is, right? So
yeah,
it's a social construct. So I can't go back 100 years and construct my own social situation. So,
right, exactly.
so she's of African descent, right? And a significant player, but they definitely were not as important in the politics of the North. And I have speculated, and still again working on evidence here, that that might have been the cause of some of the friction between the North and the South. So particularly during the Mexican period, right, you have the Jose Castro, who does have some African descent, but is generally considered to be an Espanol, and Pio Pico in the South, and in his people in the South, right? Of where the power of California lies. Does it lie in the South or in the North? Right. Part of the problem is a lot of these conflicts just get buried by the gold rush, right? By
Right,
so many Anglos coming in that it doesn't really even matter after 1849, because the power has tipped away from the Californios and all these Anglo Americans showing up. Uh, so it's a little bit hard, because that masks, I think, how it would have played out, with a little bit better documentation, that they have to kind of band together, because they now have a common foe, which is the 49ers coming in.
and it seems that in Southern California there is more of a coherence, a community coherence among Mexican Californians, let's say, than in the North. I think in the North, communities are maybe more dispersed. You don't have, a real population axis like Los Angeles, even though you have the Pueblo of San Jose. But I think that the people are more dispersed, and there's less of sort of a even a political community in the North as opposed to Southern California.
And I also think that San Francisco Bay plays a factor, because you have more outside, uh, you know,
Right,
interference in San Francisco, right? Los Angeles has a port, but it's not really that great until they build out all the jetties. It's an okay port, right? Whereas San Francisco from the beginning was a fantastic port, and so most of the shipping's going up into that area, and you get a lot of Englishmen, for example.
right.
And they do mix in with the population. William Hartnell, or as I like to call him, Guillermo Arnell, as he later became known.
Right, 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 right.
He plays an important factor, and Pio Pico is educated by him, right?
Hmm.
So I mean, there is that mix, and it mostly takes place in Monterey, is kind of the where the two sides meet. But yeah, I would agree with you that there's definitely and the demographics hold that out, right? Where there's definitely more of a Afro descendant community in the South as opposed to the North. And I think it also helps that you have, these big families of African ancestry, like the Picos, that kind of hold that all together, because it's very much it's a familial connections. We're currently building out. So part of this project is we're building a website, AfricanCalifornios.org. Um,
Yeah, describe the project a little bit.
yeah, so it's a project that I started. When I started this, I realized that um, the kind of classic historical records, it's going to be difficult, just because the way that they describe themselves in these records. So you're going to need to use some census data, family trees, build some family trees. And so I started looking at, fortunately in California, we have the Early California Populations Project. And a shout out to Steve Hackle there. Um, but you know, we have such great resources electronically, and so much is digitized that it's compared to other places I've worked in Latin America. I don't study U.S. In other parts of the U.S. they probably have similar great resources, but in Latin America we don't. And so um, I started looking at that, and it was a little bit beyond my skill level as a historian of doing the data science necessary. So I teamed up with my research partner is a guy named Fawad Kasmood, who's a professor of computer science and software engineering at Cal Poly, and we started building a database, essentially taking those who are identified as being of African descent in the few censuses we have where that's identified, and then building out their family tree to see, um, who they're related to, uh, whether this is just, a little bit by the end, it's kind of everybody. Um, right. I think certain families more so than others, right? But everybody a little bit has some sort of mixture of racial origins, um, and part of that was to try to reconstruct the concept of like a community, right? Like, are these people living together like in Southern California? That's kind of been the big revelation, is that Southern California is kind of the epicenter of this community, right? Whatever that means to them, of people of African descent.
Can I interrupt really
Yeah,
quick?
go ahead.
Did you find any sort of evidence of a community consciousness of of Californios of African descent, or was it something that you really have to kind of tease out from the historical data?
It's something you
Did
really have.
people, yeah, did people talk about it, or did they gather together, or yeah,
So far, I haven't found any evidence of them talking about it. That doesn't mean it didn't happen,
right,
right? Because a lot of what happens, especially with um, uh, as we say in history, racism is structural, right? And so a lot of what happens with racial divisions is the unsaid things, right? Why do some people live in some communities and some people live in other communities,
sure,
right? What policies led them to do that? For example, San Luis Obispo, where I live right now, is about 70% white, as they would define it in the census. 40 miles south of here, Santa Maria, is overwhelmingly Hispanic, right? Okay, there's no policy that created that, but it shows something, right?
yeah,
There's something going on there, that there's some sort of racial difference,
mm-hmm.
if not disparity between the two. And so I think it's more that kind of thing that we're going to be able to find more than them calling it out. Possibly, probably because those themselves who could have been identified as being of African descent didn't want to be identified as such.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to avoid that label as much as possible. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't affect their where they lived, who they associated with, who they married, right? And so these are the things that on the kind of the data science side, we're trying to tease out these kind of deeper societal, the fabric of the society. And so far, that's where the evidence is leaning. Where there was somewhat of a geographic, you know, it was more people of Africa. They weren't spread evenly over California. They tended to live in certain areas, and it tended to associate with certain families. So that's going to be I think the bigger story here. of understanding what actually was going on.
You talked about censuses. What about baptismal records? When children were baptized, I know from my own research, there's definitely distinction between, say, razón or neófito or what have you. I don't recall. Does that, say, mulatto or what have you? Does that appear in baptismal records, or is it mainly in the census?
Yeah, it's mainly in the census. Very rarely, and this is actually an aberration. California, in Mexico, they would have listed race at birth. So if you look at the censuses, even in northern Mexico, they were listing, their parents are this. Use the colonial term casta, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are this caste, and the mother's this, and the father's this, and so the child's this. California, it's extremely rare. I believe there's only a few handful where the priest is doing that, listing a casta for this person. It was just usually neofita, an indigenous Californian, as you mentioned, or razón, gente de razón. And the books are separate, right? If you go to the missions, so Santa Barbara is the one I've seen the originals of, right? You have the razón book and you have the neofita book, right? They're two different records. And so this was an interesting an interesting difference, right, of California, and is I would guess I'm like 90% sure is because it's a frontier area in which they just need these people who speak Spanish and are Catholic, and so they're like,
Right.
we're not going to distinguish it. And you can actually see that in Mexico, right, where you had larger African populations, they would have a separate baptismal book for them. Where you had larger indigenous populations, you have a separate baptismal book, so you'd have the all of the castas, and then you'd have a separate indigenous book. So the idea of having separate books for separate people was normal in Mexico, but here in California, no. And so that has been one of the big mysteries, right? Is that it's not in the baptismal records, which we have almost all of them, which is also somewhat rare. Don't always survive, and they've been digitized. And so, yeah, I mean, it was actually the first question I asked Steve Hackle when I started this project, because obviously he knew the stuff better. He's like, no, it's not in there. You're gonna have to find it some other way. And and I started with that 1814 questionnaire, right? And I was like, well, guess we're gonna have to do some work here, right? We're gonna have to use some techniques that perhaps haven't been used before, right? And that's why I brought in Dr. Cosmood and the team at Cal Poly. So it's several, there's data science students working on this, and we got a team here. I should have mentioned that we were given a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship last year to do this project, although, like most NEHs, it was canceled by the current administration.
What a
So,
shame.
without explanation, but I have my theories. I think it was seen as too DEI, I guess, which is a little hilarious being a white guy in charge of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So canceled outright, not put on hold. It's gone.
It's gone. There is a lawsuit pending. And the NEH, the AH, the NEH, not the NEH, AHA, the American Historical Association, the Modern Languages Association, MLA, and I believe maybe APA. The big kind of national organizations
Mm-hmm.
have filed lawsuit that these were illegally canceled. And my name has been added to that, our project's name has been added to that lawsuit. It's currently supposed to come up for some summarial judgment soon. That doesn't mean anything's going to happen. I'm not counting my dollars.
Right. Right.
I'm looking for other money now.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that the thing, is out there looking for money? Have you
Yeah.
gotten much interest or attracted much attention with this project? I would hope so.
Yes. And actually, the California descendant community have been excellent on this. I mean,
Really, that's great.
yeah. So we started a crowd fund. We actually have a crowd fund site that people can donate to, and they've been really pushing it. And
What's the URL of it?
I'll have to send it to you.
Okay, you send it to me, because we'll list it in the show
the crowd
notes.
fund. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people are super interested in it, and part of this comes back to kind of Monica's original comment When she said, "I've been waiting for years for someone to do this project," it's because people would come to the Santa Barbara Mission Archive. They would look up their family ancestry, and they'd be like, "Why is this person listed as a Pardo here?" And a
Mm,
pardo is colonial speak for somebody of African descent,
yeah.
or a mulatto. And she would have to explain, this whole, like, well, did they come from the east? No, 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 they came from Mexico, right? There were people, there were enslaved Africans that came to Mexico, and so those families made their way up through Mexico to California, and so part of it, her interest was just to help have resources to explain it to people doing their own genealogy and people studying California, right? And so, yeah, I've given, I try to give as many public talks as I can. As I tell any historical society, I will show up. Just give me a date, I'll be there, right? Because especially with California history or any kind of local history, I don't know, regional history, I guess it would be. I think it's important to kind of pound the pavement, meet people where they're at. Go. So locally, I've talked at the Donna Adobe here and the mission here and the historical society, and I try to hit those as best I can. And I've overwhelmingly people have been very happy. 'Cause I think it's something that everyone has seen, but because of the difficulties of studying it, haven't gotten into. And maybe it just takes a whole team of people at Cal Poly to figure this out.
Maybe you're just in the right place.
Yeah,
Um, it's interesting. I just gave a talk down in Santa Barbara at the Santa Barbara
yeah.
Historical Museum. And I don't know if you have or if you haven't, you should reach out to them. They're
I,
always
I
looking.
I will. I mean, like I said, anytime I talk to anybody, I'm like,
Yeah.
you just give me a spot, I'll be there. Because that's where you learn. Because people have stuff, right? I've had people literally walk up to me and hand me stuff, their own family research that has been quite helpful,
Right.
right?
And it's amazing the number of descendants
Hmm.
who are out there and who are trying to recover their family history. And I think with the digital resources that are now available, people are really able to start digging and finding out fantastic and interesting things about themselves. And like you said, anytime I give a talk, I get people coming up to me saying, I'm a ninth generation Californian, and then boom, all the last names come out and what what they've learned about themselves. And so it seems to me that there's a real thirst from people to understand their family history.
So yeah, I mean, one of our goals is we get this website, moving. It's still in the building process, is to have it be something that people could go to, look at, use, and then also feed back on and be like, hey, maybe you missed this and this and this, or I got this bit of information. I am very much open to community sourcing because there's so much out there. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
It's impressive research done by individuals out there who are, there's a million stories that I haven't found yet that I'm interested in featuring right on the website, and with the end goal of having this be something that's maybe taught in schools in California. I think this history in teaching in California has been evolving in a positive direction, but still lacks. I think we could do a better job in California of teaching our own history. Um, we actually don't invest as much as some other states and in history, right? The state that, as much as people criticize it, the state that invests the most in their history is Texas. They have a historian and they put money into it, and we really don't as much as the states like that.
I was going to mention that I was at, the Western History Conference in Albuquerque this last November. And I do have a number of friends who are historians in Texas, and it's just amazing the amount of force there is behind Texas history. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that children have to learn about it in elementary school, junior high, and high school. That's one of my pet peeves is here in California, you get fourth grade, and if you blink, you've missed it. But as you're demonstrating, our history is so rich and so complex that you really should be studying it also at a later age when you can kind of grasp some of the more complex issues and facts.
And I think there's an opportunity. Some of the people who've reached out to me are now teaching the new ethnic studies courses that are in high school classes, right? And they're hoping to add this to that curriculum as well. So I think there's an opportunity right now to be able to talk about it, because I think it helps to, I don't know, have a more honest conversation about our past, because it's complicated. Uh, the Picos as being important, for example, the Picos are horrible to the indigenous population.
Well, right, yeah. If you hear
So,
about if you
so
hear about the Picos and how they managed, or Pio Pico in particular, how he managed the
absolutely.
missions.
But I think that speaks to like the harder truths of racial hierarchies and structural racism. And so I think it's a very localized but also easy way to talk about those systems in a historical context, which tends to be easier a lot of times than as you get closer to the present. Although it obviously informs the present, um, to 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 present to middle school, high school, obviously it's already in the elementary school. Uh, uh, and I think this is a great starting point, because you can really see how incredibly complicated this is, right? Where it's not, this Euro-American imposition on indigenous population. I mean, there's that, but there's also all this other stuff going on, right? And it's people trying to find spaces to raise up in the hierarchy, and in doing so, pushing other groups out. And so I think a more it's a better way of talking about
Yeah. So, what would you say? I mean, you've said it already in some ways. What would you say this whole project corrects or seeks to correct in terms of our understanding of California history?
it. Yeah. So there. Yeah. The two ways I've always looked at it is this. Right? So in the United States, writ large, and California history somewhat gets bundled into this, even though it's a little ingenuine. Uh, you have this, right, Euro-American settler colonialists coming across, you know, so there's the kind of the way of looking at it as like they're imposing themselves onto this area, right, and it's very much white versus people of color. Um, that, in a way, looking at the California case is obviously shows that to be rather erroneous, right? Because there's lots of different groups. It's not just Euro Americans. It's people all different ancestries imposing on each other, right? It's
Right.
some are imposing on others, and it's there's more complication in that. But also, on the other hand, right, that people of color are also, guilty of oppressing different populations. And so I think in a broader sense, looking at California, and I think it's just because we're so limited on what we teach on California, this narrative has always been there, but just hasn't really played out in terms of like curriculum. I think being highlighting this will help to bring out that complication, and I think have a more honest conversations. Right? We bring up Los Angeles, for example, where I'm talking about the history of how it became was founded by mainly people of color, half of them of African descent. You had recently the scandal there with the city council people on the hot mic saying really derogatory things towards other racial groups, right? And in a city that is quite diverse. And so this people are like, oh, I'm shocked, right, that somebody of a Mexican American would say terrible things about African Americans, and I'm like, well, this is all the history, right? Like I think if we're talking about everything, and maybe this is coming to light, with Cesar Chavez, the revelations about him recently, and part of the reason he was pushed forward was because he was a man, right? And so that not Dolores Huerta, but Cesar Chavez, even though they equally are important, and also not looking at the Filipinos in that movement. So I don't know. It's this idea of as we look and complicate our history more, I think we're able to help to come to terms with the complications we have today in our own society here.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that understanding the history of California from 250 years ago to the present helps us to realize that, it didn't all spring up right after World War II, or it didn't all spring up with the gold rush, or when Silicon Valley came about, that there are deep roots here that connect to regions all over the world, but from the very beginning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, even when you think about Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, sails into San Diego Bay in 1542. And he has, well, first of all, there's a huge controversy about where he is from to begin with. But he has sailors on board who are from all different places in Latin America. He has probably African slaves on board. He has probably mestizo indigenous people on board, Filipino sailors as well. So, I mean, there's it's a whole mosaic of experiences and cultures from the get-go here in California.
I mean, and until the colonization in the 18th century, the mid 1700s, California was visited by the Spanish a lot because it was the end point of the path across the Pacific, right, from the Philippines. So you have them frequently meeting in there. I mean, I think this is a period that gets skipped, right? I think we're doing more with indigenous history, which is great, right? And we definitely should keep doing that. But it goes from, indigenous and then just kind of like, oh, and then the gold rush.
Right.
And I think talking about this, especially as the state's demographics change and maybe return more to what they were under the Spanish and the Mexicans.
Right.
This is a good way of thinking about that and confronting those things.
Well, great. Cameron, is there anything we haven't covered that you'd like to mention?
Not that I can think of, but I would hope that you would think of visiting our site, africancalifornias.org, and contributing to the and just so you know, most of our money goes to pay students, not to me. We pay students to do the work
Absolutely.
on the database. So I wish it went more to me, but it mostly goes to students. No, I mean, I had to say, this goes to students, right? And so if you're interested in it, feel free to contact me. I'm here at Cal Poly, and I love to hear from anybody in the public.
Great. Well, I want to thank you for this. Once again, it's a topic that I've really been interested in, and frankly, have fished around to try and find people who are actively working on it, and or who could speak about it. So I'm grateful to have run across your work, and actually, I think maybe you reached out to me first.
Someone connected us from the California community.
Someone connected us. Yeah. I'm really grateful for that. And I really hope that what you're doing sort of catalyzes more people to work on this whole area of the African presence, the presence of African descendants in California's history, because there's so much that goes way back. And I think it's a great gift to all of us.
Yeah, in fact, you could argue that we're named after an African queen, Califia, from the novel, actually was from Africa. So
exactly, very true.
And there, so
that's a good point.
So it runs deep in the roots of California.
It really does.
Yeah.
Well, Cameron Jones, I'm really grateful for this, and I'm looking forward to visiting your website, reading your book when it comes out.
It's getting there.
Yeah, we're all in that boat. I feel your pain. I've got a project that I'm working on, and it's getting there.
Yeah. I gotta get the website figured out first, and I think that will help to get all the stories together that I need for the book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the California Frontier Show. If you'd like to support the show, the best thing to do is to let other people know about it. If you'd like to support it monetarily, there are a couple ways of doing that. One is by scrolling down in your podcast app to where it says support the show. There you can become a subscriber for as little as $3 a month. And if you want to give a one-time donation, just below you'll see where it says give a one-time donation. Finally, the show is supported by California History Teachers, which is a full year of lessons for 4th grade California history and social studies. You can find out more at www.californiahistoryteachers.com. And if you input the coupon code podcast, you'll receive 25% off your monthly or annual subscription. So check it out.